Hey folks, today's episode is brought to you by one of our favorite sponsors, sunsetlakecbd.com. They are located in Albury, I don't know how you say that, Vermont, just outside of Burlington. They were originally a family-owned a dairy farm producing milk for Ben and Jerry's ice cream, of all people. And then in 2018, they decided to diversify. If you're a farmer, you understand you always got to do that. They started to grow hemp for CBD, and now they are an incredible producer of a whole array of great products. One of the beautiful things I love about Sunset CBD is not just the fact that they've got CBD infused coffee and fudge, and they've got smokables and great tinctures, some that help you sleep, some that help you focus, gummies, and so on. They have great farming practices. They collaborate with the University of Vermont to implement regenerative farming practices, so that helps protect the soil. Their hemp is 100% pesticide free. They only use organic fertilizers, and they use integrated pest management. And you can see all the third-party tested results of all their products at sunsetlakecbd.com. They have great business practices, $20 minimum wage, employees own majority of the company. And if you enjoy, some of the recreational things out there, but you don't want to get too confused over the course of your day. Yeah, thank you. The sunsetlakecbd.com is for you. Check it out. sunsetlakecbd.com. Use the coupon code LEFTISBEST and you get 20% off. And now, time for our special show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, October 9, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA, and from the heart of the Bellagio Hotel in sweltering hot Las Vegas, Nevada, as I am covering the Mass Torts 2024 Fall Conference. Also on the program today, Hurricane Milton barreling toward Florida Gulf Coast as a Category 4 storm, maybe creeping back up to Category 5. Evacuation orders don't help if you can't evacuate. Meanwhile, polls continue to show a close race as Harris woos would-be orphaned Republicans, but can't even land Mitt Romney. Meanwhile, Biden supposedly losing trust in the Israeli government. Can you imagine?
No.
This as he is set to speak to Bibi Netanyahu for what very well may be the first time in months over Israel's planned attack on Iran. U.S. Department of Justice weighing whether to seek a Google breakup. And a new Senate report shows that the Trump White House blocked the FBI Kavanaugh sexual assault investigation. Interesting symmetry there, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Supreme Court allows a ban on emergency abortions to remain in place in Texas. Boeing machinists remain on strike as Boeing walks away from the table. Elon Musk finally gets Twitter X back on Brazil by deciding to comply with Brazilian law.
Glenn Greenwald, it's his happy day today.
More resignations and accusations of evidence destruction ensnarl the Eric Adams administration, and Republicans continue to pour millions upon millions of dollars to demonize transgender people. This with a new report that shows just how destructive it is to teen transgender kids. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We bring that volume down a little bit. It's a little bit hot, Maya. I am not in Brooklyn, am I, Emma?
You are not. You are at the Mass Torts Conference. And
Wait, do we have Emma up there? I can't see her up.
Oh, yeah, no, we do. Sorry, I was just on volume. There you go.
Well, I mean, were you about to unveil the Dutch angle? This is the real question that everyone has been asking. And this technological prowess?
Yeah.
Is that not happening?
Things have upgraded for me technologically. Look at that.
Whoa.
Hello.
I was going to mess up my cropping. So.
Yeah, we
Sorry.
can't do that. We can't do that when we can't do that.
I'm just saying, this is Sam's Brett Cooper impression.
All right, so let me just explain to folks who are not aware of this. More or less for the past 12 years, 13 years, with a little bit of a break during COVID, I will come to Vegas, first as part of Ring of Fire Radio back in the day, and we'll interview, there's twice a year, Mass Torts Conference, and we'll interview a range of lawyers who are bringing essentially, it's not quite class action suits. These are mass torts where, and maybe a little bit later, we'll get into the difference between the two. Well, I'll get into it right now. Mass torts are different from class action. Class action is when everyone has received the same harm. So, for instance, now the Supreme Court has disallowed this, because of arbitration cases. But if AT&T overcharges everybody $5 on their phone bill, that becomes a class. You've all suffered the same harm. A mass tort is where a company takes an action, but there is multiply different results. So, for instance, the BP settlement, when there was an oil spill, that was a mass tort action where you had people who had hotels suffered a loss because nobody wanted to come to the Gulf because there was oil in the water. Shrimpers suffered loss. Maybe there were some people who got cancers. So everybody, you had different types of damages. And in fact, and many times we were on the PFAS, Forever Chemicals case, years and years and years ago, speaking to the original lawyers, and then Mike Papantonio, who actually litigated the case. You had, in that case, DuPont dumping into rivers a C8 chemical is what it was called. And a court found about 3,500 people within a certain radius got all sorts of ailments they shouldn't have otherwise gotten, statistically speaking. So you had a bunch of different types of injuries. And DuPont basically got bankrupt by this because they owed billions of dollars. Some people had, colitis. Some people had cancers. Some people had other diseases that were a function of this chemical. And there's essentially an algorithm that gets created, and the payout goes in that way. And so I'll be talking to lawyers today about cases that range from, or over the next couple of days, cases that range from basically a porn operator knowing that they're disseminating child pornography, cases where Johnson & Johnson was selling baby powder that ended up causing cancer, and how they're trying to escape paying people out via bankruptcy. We're going to be talking tomorrow, too, about more of these Section 230 cases. This is getting very big. There are a lot of TikTok cases that have now exploded because of a TikTok case that happened about a month or so ago. And it's going to change the way that social media functions, I think. We're going to be talking to some civil rights attorneys. It's a very strange mix of folks here because a lot of the lawyers are real anti-corporate raiders. In the past, I've spoken to Rosa Parks' first attorney here years ago. And then others, they basically are in the business, if you will, of helping lawyers find cases, manage cases, et cetera, et cetera. We'll talk more about that as it goes on. But first, and I should also add that I tried to come up with a new system for booking this year. And pro tip, if you are going to be doing the show on West Coast time, that's the time you should set your calendar to, not East Coast time. So it's made it a little bit, this year's a little bit dicey because a lot of people I had booked thought it was 3 hours earlier or later. I can't remember what it was. But with that said, let's get into this. Obviously, the big story right now in the country is, just as a sheer story, is the Hurricane Milton as it is bearing down on Florida. Again, another once-in-a-lifetime storm. We say this now multiple times a year, it sounds like. And yesterday you played that clip of the weatherman who was getting emotional because he knows the level of destruction this is going to incur. And he also knows that it's a function of climate change. Hurricanes existed before this. The intensity of this hurricane, if you've been following meteorologists or are just, they're blown away by it. There are statements like, this is at the peak of what seems to be possible in terms of Earth's physics, in terms of the power of this storm.
We covered this yesterday, but just that if in its power, right, at Category 5 when it was being measured, people were saying if there could be another category added, like a Category 6 or something to that effect, that this would be in that range. And with the future that we're seeing as a result of man-made and climate change, that is not a far-off possibility that we'll need a new category for the storms that we're going to be seeing.
And well, let's play this clip, and then we'll talk a little bit more too about the right-wing response to it. But again, this is a function of just how hot the water is in the Gulf of Mexico and the energy that it lends to this type of storm. Here is the mayor
of Tampa,
Jane Castor, begging people to evacuate on CNN. This was on Monday.
Yeah, we've seen how jammed up those highways are. I know a lot of the tolls have been suspended to help facilitate people getting out of there. What would you say to people tonight who are saying, you know what, I'm going to ride this out, I've ridden others out? What would you say to people who aren't heeding those evacuation orders?
Well, I can tell you right now that they may have done that in others. There's never been one like this. And this, Helene was a wake-up call. This is literally catastrophic. And I can say without any dramatization whatsoever, if you choose to stay in one of those evacuation areas, you're going to die.
Wow. I mean, that is an incredibly blunt message. And I know you have a lot of experience dealing with these storms. You don't say something like that lightly, Mayor.
I've never said that. And 10 to 12 foot surge. I mean, if this takes a jog to the south, that's going to save us from the storm surge. But it stays on the track that it's projected to be on right now. Or if it goes a bit north, would be even worse. Some of the predictions are saying that Pinellas County to the south of us, the entire county is going to be underwater. So this is something that I have never seen in my life. And I can tell you that anyone who was born and raised in the Tampa Bay area has never seen anything like this before.
Okay.
People need
here's
to get out.
here's the issue with that, and good for her for trying to get people to evacuate. But this seems to be the thing that that Helene was not a wake-up call about, that the media doesn't seem to be terribly sensitive to, is that obviously it's important for her to go on and say this type of things, but there are tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people who do not have the ability to evacuate.
Yeah.
I mean, here, this is just one example. And the only reason why they talk about it is because she went on TikTok. She's got, she has 6 children. Her husband, they have 4 dogs, and her mother-in-law, and they can't evacuate. She says, we don't have the money to evacuate. Where am I evacuating to? They have a 7-passenger Chevrolet Suburban. It would have to fit 9 people and the 4 dogs. God. Driving out of state would take 10 hours, she said. She worries about becoming stranded without gas or being on the road in Florida when the hurricane makes landfall. She doesn't have the money to pack her family on a flight. Incidentally, they're price gouging on these flights.
Yep.
She can't go into multiple hotel rooms. She can't get Airbnb. The Airbnbs must be, I mean, out of, and I would imagine the hotel rooms are all like, to the extent that there any were available, they're cranking up the price. That's the way they do their pricing. Same with Airbnb. I mean, the mayor says that Helene was a wake-up call. But who is supposed to be woken up? Like, this is going to become a regular feature of our world. You know, maybe once, twice, 3 times, 4 times a year, affecting millions of people in this country. We have seemingly no plans and no interest for any type of like collective evacuation strategies. Like, I don't know, we're going to provide buses.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what happened with Katrina too.
Of course. I mean, it's not shocking that Ron DeSantis is essentially saying you better sink or swim. I mean, no pun intended to that degree. And we brought this up on the show yesterday. Home insurance companies have, the major ones, have either jacked up the prices in Florida or have basically stopped offering policies to people. There are people who can't get off work. There are people like that mother who can't evacuate.
Yep.
But there are people who can evacuate as well, who also can't get policies in the state. And they may have had their home for a while and thought like, oh, maybe now is a good time to get home insurance. And then they find that Farmers or AAA has jacked up their price or stopped offering policies in the state of Florida. Because we had some IMs, people saying, well, I don't really have sympathy for people that are building homes where they know that it's going to get messed up due to climate change, due to these weather events. It's like, there are people who have lived there their whole lives, families that are from Florida. This isn't just retirees going down there. These are whole communities that are on the front lines. And like, we've privatized everything. We've privatized, sink or swim with your evacuation. If you can't get off work, if you don't have the means, tough crap. If you can't get a home insurance policy because of climate change, because we have a governor also who has banned the consideration of climate change and home construction and has barred it from consideration in other governmental policies. tough crap. Like, deal with it. This is the kind of thing that we need to have addressed on a mass scale and on the federal level too.
Well, I mean, that's the point that we optimistically thought emphasizing the industrial origin of climate change would lead to us taking collective action to mitigate it. Really, the reason to emphasize it now is to take collective action to help people survive it.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is, I mean, and at one point there's going to be an awareness that we're going to have to address this, but we have one of the major Republican legislative fundraisers, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene. We may all think she's a joke, but within the context of the Republican Party, she is a major figure, an important figure who is out there basically saying, not only is climate change fake, there's a weather machine that's creating these things. I mean,
Trump's calling it a hoax. Trump has repeatedly called climate change a hoax. And when asked about it, he said, okay, well, there will be more beachfront property, which is, first of all, not true because there will just be less land mass as the sea level rises. But also, hey, this is supposed to be your home base. You turned Florida as red as hell, buddy. Don't you care at all? I mean, obviously not. But like, these are entire communities in the south of this country and in other areas that are going to be decimated by this. And here's Marjorie Taylor Greene. She says, yes, they can control the weather on Twitter. Here's Obama's CIA director, John Brennan, talking about it. Anyone who says they don't or makes fun of this is lying to you. By the way, the people know it and hate all of you who are trying to cover it up. Yeah, I got to call foul on that. I don't think the people collectively believe that the government, or whoever they is, you can interpret that in many ways, controls the weather. But yeah, as you mentioned, Sam, I mean, she's the most...
The data is out there that it is not helpful for incumbents or people who are associated with incumbents for hurricanes for natural disasters in an election.
Yeah.
So if they had the ability to control it, you would think they would be a little more strategic when they deploy this thing.
Well, they don't have the ability to read political science.
Right. And this, but if I were to think of one representative who's most representative of the base of the Republican Party, I would think Marjorie Taylor Greene. And here she is. Georgia's close to Florida. The state that she's a representative of is also going to be feeling the effects of this. Whether it be people
felt it in the context of Helene too.
Right, exactly. And she and instead of doing anything for the constituents of Georgia's 14th, she'd rather make some vague allusions to the Jews controlling the weather machines or whatever.
Yeah,
that
it's pretty terrifying. All right, let's read got a couple of sponsors, and then we'll talk more about this in terms of the right-wing thing. It's really upsetting. My daughter texted me today and was like, it seems like nobody in charge cares about climate change. Like, they don't pay any attention. Yeah. This is the world that, our kids are going to have to grow up in, and this is going to be just a regular event. And it really is just a question of, like, at what point does society as a whole accept the reality of this and begin to address it? I don't know. Meantime, we're getting close towards the end of the year. People start to think about their charitable giving. Hopefully you do that during the course of the year as well. But if you're one of those people who's a details person like I am, you read nutritional information on cereal boxes. I've actually got an app that rates a lot of these things. Never mind. When you're given a charity, you should look at GiveWell. It's an independent resource for rigorous, transparent research about great giving opportunities. This website's going to leave even the most detailed oriented reader busy. GiveWell has spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations, only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations are going to save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about their high impact giving. You can find all their research and recommendations on their site. This is completely free. You make a tax-deductible donation to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. The Globe, Boston Globe, called GiveWell the gold standard for giving. This, I have been giving through GiveWell now, I don't know, for maybe half a dozen years. I have found multiple charities of that. They rotate through a little bit ones that they think are providing the most dollar for dollar impact. Here are some examples of what donations to GiveWell's recommended charities can achieve. Vitamin A supplements. Costs about $2 to deliver a vitamin A supplement to a child. Vitamin A deficiency can increase mortality rates. Vitamin A distributions can save a life by reducing this deficiency. They give cash incentives for routine childhood vaccines. Costs about $155 to vaccinate an infant. This funding provides cash transfers to incentivize caregivers to bring babies to clinics for these routine childhood vaccinations, which obviously prevents diseases, reduce child mortality, and then gives families living in around the world in extreme or poverty an opportunity to use that money in a way that they think is most helpful. Go to givewell.org to find out more or make a donation. Select podcast. Enter the Majority Report with Sam Seder at checkout to make sure they know how you heard about them. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more. And I have to say, just to add, the amazing thing is their level of accountability. They have a whole vertical on things they've gotten wrong in the past, just to give you a sense of the level of integrity and sort of vigilance that they employ. Also, sponsoring the program today, Nutrafol. I've told this story a million times. People already know, but I've been taking this for a couple of years now, largely because I just started feeling like I was getting a little bit thinning up here, and I started noticing there was a little bit more, I was shedding hair a little bit more, and I didn't want to take something that was like a drug. I didn't want to take something that had certain types of impact on our sexual performance, with all due respect to everybody. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement brand. Trusted by over 1 million people, you will see thicker, stronger, faster growing hair with less shedding in just 3 to 6 months with Nutrafol. Their Nutrafol's hair growth supplements are physician formulated. They use 100% drug-free ingredients. Their patented technology provides consistent, reliable results, again, with men reporting no compromise in sexual performance. And here's the thing about Nutrafol. Many supplements will just study the particular ingredients and say, okay, we've got this ingredient, we've got that ingredient, and look at the studies based on those ingredients. Nutrafol clinically tests their final formulations, the combinations of these ingredients, to ensure their efficacy. In a clinical study, 84% of men showed improvement in their hair after 6 months taking Nutrafol Men Hair Growth Supplement. And with a Nutrafol subscription, building a hair growth routine is simple. You purchase online, no prescription required, automated deliveries, free shipping, keep you on track. Plus, you can save up to 20%. You're going to have access to free naturopathic doctor consults and Headspace membership included. Take the first step towards achieving your hair growth goals. For a limited time, Nutrafol offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping. When you go to Nutrafol.com/men, enter the promo code TMR. It's for the Majority Report, TMR. Find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com/men, spelled NUTRAFOL.com/men. Promo code TMR. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code TMR. Folks, we'll put in the podcast and YouTube descriptions links to both those. And all right, I want to, we'll take a quick break. and an interview I recorded with attorney Kim Adams. She's with the Levin Papantonio firm. Apparently, there's this company, MindGeek, which has now been bought by a different private equity firm called Ethical. I can't remember. I mentioned it, but it's pretty funny. But they are basically I guess, an online porn conglomerate. They own all of these porn sites, Pornhub and others, I guess. And they are showing, in many instances, or have shown, porno that is produced with children. And this has been like an age-old problem on the internet. There is this notion of somehow companies are protected if the content is user generated, but what constitutes user generated? Interesting conversation with Kim Adams, that all of the sort of like ways in which it's presented, the thumbnails, the search terms, the algorithm, is in and of itself content. That's the argument they're making. Here's that interview that I recorded yesterday in this space. Continuing our coverage of Mass Torts Conference in Las Vegas 2024, the fall edition. I'm joined in the conference room, I guess we could call it, at the Bellagio Hotel. Kim Adams from Levin Law, one of the basically firms that run this conference and have for years. Kim, you're taking a case about essentially like a big porno conglomerate. Walk us through this.
Sure. So we filed a case a few years ago against MindGeek and their other affiliates. MindGeek runs the largest pornography site, or was at the time, Pornhub, along with RedTube and a lot of other websites or tube sites that they run. And so our case involved minors who were filmed at the time. They were minors at the time that they were filmed, and their videos were exploited on these pornography sites. So that's kind of the basis of the case.
I just want to point out, I did a little bit of research on MindGeek. It is a Canadian multinational, basically pornographic conglomerate, owned by a Canadian private equity firm called Ethical Capital Partners.
Now, yes.
They've changed their name?
That purchase happened more recently than not.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Well, so just lay out for us, like, what is the legal action that one can take, and what is the responsibility that a publishing platform online has in terms of like what content is there?
Right. So I think that what gets interesting about any online case, right, is determining who's a publisher, who's not a publisher, a lot of the terminology from the legal perspective. But our allegations involve the fact that as an online platform, in this case, we allege that they created content that encouraged, facilitated, and helped disseminate child pornography. And so our causes of action involve both child pornography possession, dissemination, creation on the one hand, which is a statutory claim. On the other hand, it also involves Trafficking Victims Protection Act, which is a civil case for folks who and companies who facilitate and benefit from instances they knew or should have known to involve sex trafficking. So the trick is not really a trick, but with sex trafficking, minors cannot consent right, to being sexually exploited. And so for our intents and purposes, minors are victims of sex trafficking. And when you have a pornography site that pays content partners, or who has, as we allege, no barriers to entry for exploiting those minors in videos and images and all of those sorts of things, that is trafficking of that minor. And so that's the basis of the allegation of our lawsuit is twofold.
Okay, so let's start with the trafficking part first. I mean, I remember interviewing an attorney here years ago who was they were suing a chain of motels or hotels that were aware that, or were not taking the steps necessary to make sure that there was no essentially child trafficking that was being done in the context of their hotels, right? And that's, you know, you got to prove that they were aware of it and they were allowing it to happen and they're facilitating it. So there's an analogy there, I guess, on some level. But what is the relationship between MindGeek and the, for lack of a better term, you know, the contractors who create this content?
So
do you need to, how much of a connection do you need to make there?
So I think the threshold is knew or should have known, right? They don't have to have actual knowledge. They knew or should have known these things were happening. How could they have known? Both in the hotel context as well as the online context, they know who their users are, right? And on MindGeek's platform, you have almost, as we would allege, a heightened responsibility because you're running a pornography site. So you have at least a responsibility to make sure that the people in the videos, the images, are not minors. When you talk about
so is this user content, I mean, theoretically user content, as opposed to MindGeek commissioning people?
Well, I think it's both, because MindGeek creates the platform, they create the rules, they create thumbnails, they create algorithms, they create the things that help facilitate a minor. If you're creating a thumbnail for every single, as we would allege, every single video or image that comes to your site, and your program is creating what's going to be the hottest search term, or you're creating what is the hottest image that's going to be looked at, or where the activity is happening within the video, then you're creating content. So it's not really, maybe the user supported the content originally, right? But MindGeek's creating its own content. And so I think that's where the difference
is. This, I mean, is this analogous to like what that YouTube services provide in terms of like that relationship? Because I wonder how close we're getting to like a Section 230 type of case here.
Yeah, well, it's all about Section 230, right? So in YouTube.
All right, we should tell us about Section 230, because there's been a big TikTok case that happened, I think, like 2 months ago, and that has completely changed at least the dynamic. And it really was a function of the Supreme Court almost being hung by its own petard in terms of what they had said in a case about censoring or social media. But walk us through, what is Section 230?
Sure, I'll do that. And let's just say, to be clear, child pornography is not protected speech, right? So we need to be very clear, I think, about what we're talking about when it comes to protecting children. With Section 230 is an immunity statute, and it was created years and years and decades ago, right? And it was
Telecommunications Act.
That's right.
Telecommunications
Correct.
Act of 96.
It was an effort to facilitate online providers, right? The internet was exploding, so they wanted a way to protect those people. And at that point, people were simply posting things, and you had platforms that supported it.
Right. It's a platform versus a publisher, was sort of the vague distinction, right?
I think that's fair. At least it was at that time, right? And so now I think it has turned into facilitating money. Before, you might have had an ad on there and you had no control over what that ad was doing. That's not the case anymore, right? If Pornhub, as we would allege, has its material on there, Pornhub is going to bring in marketers that are tracking categories they create, terms they create, algorithms that they create. Now, there is a circuit split in the federal bench on whether or not algorithms bust through immunity or not, right? We don't know if you're entitled to immunity. I think the U.S. Supreme Court heard the Google v. Gonzalez case, which was all about YouTube. And the Supreme Court punted the question. And I think that when the right case gets there, there will probably be a reworking of Section 230. You see
And
often,
just to be clear,
yeah,
circuit split means that one of 13 circuits has ruled one way, another of the 13 circuits has ruled another way. That conflict, the law of the land is literally different depending on which circuit you're in, and what other circuits sort of use as the circuit that they're going to follow. But in those instances, the Supreme Court feels more pressure to take the case.
right. And what facts, right, support that? So I didn't clarify on Section 230. You asked me about 230. And so 230 is an immunity statute that says any platform that is just a publisher is being looked at as a publisher of third-party content. So if Sam wants to write an article, Kim wants to write an article, and you publish that the platform owner should not be touted with policing what a third party is developing.
Right.
That's
so if I have a blog, for instance, with comments,
right,
that I'm not responsible for what people write in those comments.
That was the intent of 230, was to immunize those folks. What cases that you're seeing now is they're almost creating products within themselves, right? And because those products are being created, plaintiffs are arguing that you should not immunize people who are exploiting children intentionally. Or not,
just
otherwise.
to use my blog analogy, I'm allowing comments, but I've also devised ways of pushing certain comments to the top. And I've also devised ways to send ads to people who write certain types of comments.
Right.
And I'm actually directing people's attention to different places on my now much more sophisticated blog, which is now maybe almost a social media platform. And embedded in that, I'm making content, and that pushes me into the realm of a publisher of sorts.
I don't know that I would agree with that, but we can certainly have that discussion. I think that it could, right? And it probably could, so long as you don't have illegal content on your site. And I think that the difference here is the conduct we allege is so egregious on these website platforms that are exploiting children, all of your social media platforms, that I think legislation and the court systems want to put a stop to it.
Right. So this goes beyond 230 into a realm where this is not, there's actually a whole separate, distinct set of law associated with child pornography.
Yes, there is that pillar. However, what we allege is that 230 does not apply, A, because they're creating content. If you're creating content, 230 does not apply to you. Or B, let's say the court doesn't agree with us, we would then go into some of the fixes that they've tried to do with 230 with there's another legislative statute that says, okay, well, we're going to let you sue a website platform owner, but your conduct has to rise to the level almost of like criminal conduct or intentional conduct. But we have those allegations in some of these cases, which you don't always have with other content providers, if you will. So I think that what we have seen, at least in our case, on the MindGeek case, we won the motion to dismiss, and that's just what we allege versus what the defendants allege. The court said, yes, there's enough information here to move forward. I'm not going to dismiss the case based on MindGeek's allegation that they are a hosting provider, but certainly that's what they want to be, right? We're just a content hosting provider. And so the court, at least at that stage, said, no, we're not agreeing with that. The court also certified our class action, which was essentially saying that the scope of our class is anyone who is a minor under the age of 18 at the time a video or image was produced, and was that video or content was made available for viewing to the open public on those platforms, is a potential member of this class. So the court certified that class for anyone who fits into that. And so now our next phase will be putting out notice. So we've done those things, and then we will have to go to trial to see, does the jury actually agree with us? Is the jury going to agree that the facts show that they created content? Does the jury agree that the facts show that they acted intentionally or with malice, reckless malice, malice disregard, or does the jury believe that in and of itself they were disseminating, possessing, and distributing child pornography? So those things will still have to come to a jury unless something else happens with the case. But right now we've hit all the marks, and our next step would be summary judgment. And that's where the court looks at all the facts that have come in and decides if there is a question of fact from both sides, the court won't issue a summary judgment order. It will go to a jury. The court could look at all the facts and say it will be impossible for a jury to see this case some other way than the way that the plaintiffs are alleged it or the way the defendants have alleged it, and could make a ruling. So
it's basically saying, like, here are the facts. We don't need to adjudicate them.
That's correct.
And the judge is capable of adjudicating the law in this instance.
That's right.
How many plaintiffs do you have at this point?
So there are hundreds of plaintiffs that fit into this bucket. With regard to how many potential class members, there are thousands of class members that fit into this. And upon our estimation and assumptions.
In terms of that first motion that the court dismissed, the idea is that essentially, like, we don't operate, we're not a content provider, we're just a content hoster, essentially. That seems like a big ruling in terms of, like, building the building blocks for a future verdict against the defendants, right? Because that seems to be their number one defense.
It is. So yes, if the court ruled in any case that Section 230 immunity does not apply to them, then absolutely. What you're seeing on TikTok, Snapchat, some of those other cases is creative allegations also. They're saying that this is a product liability case. Section 230 doesn't even apply whether they created content or not. They created an app or a program or a product within their platform. And so now you're looking at product liability law. You're not looking at trafficking law. You're not looking at child pornography dissemination, those laws. You're looking at product liability law, like what we're here at this conference talking about.
I see. But my understanding is that TikTok case, the one that was brought by, I think, parents of a child who killed herself accidentally by doing something that on TikTok was like the rage.
Mm-hmm.
That there was that the court said, citing the Supreme Court in that other case of whether you could censor political thought or whatnot on the social platforms, and they said you can't make us censor political thought because we have a First Amendment right here because we're doing expression. In this subsequent case that they determined, well, if you have a First Amendment right, then you are exercising speech. And if your platform is exercising speech, you're not just a host, you're a publisher.
Yeah.
But that's not implicated in your case.
No, it's not. And I think hosting versus publishing, I view those almost as the same. Right. If you're hosting content or publishing content, you're hosting content that you are acting as a publisher to evaluate. So I view those as the same sort of, or similar at least, as opposed to creating content where, and I'm not overly familiar with the TikTok case.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. And so in this instance, Pornhub or whatever these outfits, they're actually creating the pornography.
That's our allegation, is that well, if you're creating even a thumbnail of child pornography, you're creating content. You don't have to create the actual content. You have to materially contribute to the illegality of the content that's out there.
I see. And so what's the timing for the next phase?
So
how do you reach members of this class action? Because I would imagine that if you have been subject to this type of abuse, I think in some instances, maybe there was a certain amount of suppression. In some instances, you may not even realize that it was like illegal and abuse. And certainly there's a cohort of people who are like, how am I going to hear about a class action suit?
Right. So to answer your first question, we're almost finished with the summary judgment briefing. So that will be happening in October. With regard to how people are noticing on some of our public filings, you'll see that We will put notices on the websites the court has ordered. We will talk to different or or trafficking victim protection organizations, social media notice, other kind of publications, radio, those kinds of things. And so that notice is going out, and they have until, I want to say, December to opt out of the class if they don't want to participate.
I see. And then in these instances, essentially your class action will allow people who, even if they find out about it later, will be able to recoup some type of compensation or whatnot, but they will not be able to pursue their own case similar to this one.
Unless they exclude themselves from the class. Correct. They will be subject to the rulings by the court in the class action. So if the court rules against us, let's say, then it would rule against all class members unless they have opted out of the class.
Have you guys entered discovery yet?
Oh, yes.
And so I imagine there's only a certain amount of stuff that you can talk about, but have you found, like, characterize what you found there in terms of the people who were running MindGeek at the time?
So I guess the only thing I can say about that is there's a lot of public articles where the heads of those organizations have written very publicly about how they feel about the case and how they feel about those things that are going. I can't speak to kind of what the discovery actually showed, but I think that when you go onto the public viewing platforms, you can kind of see how they feel about it. So we feel like our case is very well supported. Our allegations are very well supported. I think that, you know, the Canadian folks that run these platforms are not necessarily, weren't, I should say. I don't know the new folks. And I'm hopeful that because of these actions, that all of the social media and pornography sites are doing a better job at protecting the youth. So I'll just say that. And I'm hopeful that whoever the owner is and whatever the owners are doing at this point, that they're making every single effort they can to block children from being exploited on their site. They control those powers, right? So
it's amazing because I know this was like an issue 30 years ago. The late Barry Crimmins, a comedian from Boston, testified in front of Congress about what was happening on AOL's platform with this stuff. It's amazing that this still goes on in such, you know, such a commercial, like public facing enterprise.
It is amazing, and it's very sad. We have to do more for our kids.
Kim Adams from Levin Papantonio, a law firm. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland, Majority Report. I am in Las Vegas, Nevada for the twice a year. What is it? Is that biannual?
Biannual.
Yep.
Biannual Mass Torts Conference. That was Kim Adams talking about the cases around going after this company, MindGeek, owners of Pornhub and I guess other porn sites. In the next 5 or 10 minutes, hopefully I'll have Andy Birchfield here talking about the Johnson & Johnson bankruptcy that came out of the ruling that they had culpability in having, you know, essentially like a putting out baby powder, knowing that it could cause cancer, particularly with women, and putting the baby powder all over their body, and in specific places. We'll talk more with Andy Birchfield. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know this part.
Blue episode here.
Yep. Let's get into this for a moment, though. There is this like new talking point that seems to be going around based upon the question of a society that attempts to control women's bodies. And evidence of that being, and we should say, 6-3 decision gets rid of Roe v. Wade. One of those people who voted upon it was Brett Kavanaugh, who was credibly accused of sexual assault. And we were told at the time of his hearings, and recall, it was Dianne Feinstein that sat on these charges for these accusations for an extended period of time. There's every reason to believe now that Dianne Feinstein was suffering from early stages dementia at that time.
Yeah.
And who knows whether that impacts her decisions in that moment. Nevertheless, it certainly seemed to impact him when she was talking about, hugging Lindsey Graham, the next set of hearings and whatnot.
That was during the Amy Coney Barrett ones where she put up 0 fight, and it was quite clear that
exactly
things were not all there at that point.
And so here you have a guy who the Trump White House basically prevented the FBI from investigating Brett Kavanaugh. All right, you know what? I have our guest here. So let's we'll table
that.
We'll table that. Andy, if you would sit right over here, that'd be great. And terrific. All right. So let me just switch my camera over. Can I just, and then we'll get a sound check. Andy, can you just talk into that?
Andy Birchfield from Beasley Allen.
There we go. Hold on 1 second. All right, here we go. Let me get this microphone a little bit closer to you.
All right. How's that?
Oh, that's great. Hold on 1 second, and we're going to switch our camera over. So joining me now, Andy Birchfield. Andy, what firm are you from?
Beasley Allen in Montgomery, Alabama, and Atlanta.
Okay, and so you are working on the Johnson & Johnson case.
Yes.
Just for listeners who are not familiar with this case, before we get into the specifics of where it is now, can you give just a slight history on the case for us?
Sure. This litigation's been going on for a little over 10 years. And it involves Johnson & Johnson's baby powder, their talc-based baby powder that has been shown to contain asbestos. So it causes ovarian cancer, and that's what we're litigating. We're litigating now. It also causes mesothelioma, and J&J has recently settled most of their mesothelioma cases, but we're litigating on behalf of ovarian cancer claims. There are about 57,000 cases that are pending in the multi-district litigation in New Jersey, but we represent, and we represent a significant number, over 10,000 claimants ourselves. Beasley Allen does, but we also serve in leadership in the MDL. My law partner Leo Dell is co-lead of the MDL, and so
that's the multi-district litigation, and this is where you have different cases that are essentially consolidated into one case.
That's right. That's exactly right. So when a judicial panel on multi-district litigation decides that, hey, it would be in the best interest of all parties if this is consolidated, streamlined discovery, bring all the federal court cases together in one place. And that's what the panel did in 2016. And so it's formed in New Jersey.
So when we're talking about either the mesothelioma, but the ovarian cancer, that is a function of what was in the talc.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. What are the elements of the case that need to be proved to show, for this case, essentially, what are the components? In other words,
mm-hmm.
how much liability, intent, or knowledge, and then damages?
Yes. Okay. So first of all, you have to show that there is a scientific basis, a causal link between the product the baby powder and the injury that that the plaintiff is suffering. In our case, ovarian cancer, and so that link is very strong. I mean, J&J one of the things that we have seen and that we've learned through discovery is that J&J has known. They have known that there's a link between their baby powder and the asbestos in their baby powder and ovarian cancer for decades, going back in the 50s and 60s.
I mean, we've known about asbestos being problematic for that long. Like,
Absolutely.
I have to say, there's a lot of people probably listening right now. Is how does a company know? I mean, asbestos.
Yeah.
I'm of the age of and I remember this became a big deal, and I also now I'm aware if you've got to abate asbestos in a place, it's incredibly expensive because it's so dangerous.
Yes.
How does a company justify? This is like an individual working at Johnson & Johnson. We have asbestos in our powder. Isn't that a problem?
Well, they have made a very dedicated and elaborate effort to cover up the fact that they have asbestos, and they will deny it. They'll deny that there's asbestos, in their talc, although there's been test after test after test. Their own testing for decades has shown that there is asbestos in their talc, but yet, I mean, it's what we're seeing over and over again. You deny it over and over again. You deny it loudly and cause doubt.
What is the function of asbestos in talc? In other words, why would they just take it out?
Yeah, the problem is, so talc is a natural mineral, and when with your talc mines, there is asbestos veins that run through it. So it's not a matter of being able to to remove it. That would be a costly process. So removing the asbestos from the talc is really difficult. But what we have seen, and what's so egregious here, is that J&J for decades has had a safer alternative. They could have, instead of using a talc-based baby powder, they could have used cornstarch.
Right.
And in fact, that's what's on the shelves today. You go to, that's what J&J is. They pulled talc off the market, talc-based baby powder off the market in the U.S. since 2020, and they have cornstarch. But they knew that. They had a patent for the cornstarch decades before. They just chose not to do it.
Why?
Because baby powder was their iconic brand, and they just didn't want to. I mean,
they didn't want to mess with success,
right? And part of that seems to be part of their elaborate cover-up effort as well.
And okay, so where I want to sort of circle back to this, but let's get through sort of the details, because I'm just curious as a lawyer, when you come across this stuff, how it blows your mind, I would imagine. But where are we in the process now? So they have settled or come to an agreement on the mesothelioma side, and this is presumably I would imagine impacts babies. Your cohort is probably more is it
women,
more grown adults, but I would imagine babies.
Mm-hmm.
It's in the air and you're sucking it in as if you're working in asbestos abatement.
That's right.
Without a mask on.
For the mesothelioma, you had mothers that were using it as they're diapering their babies. You have babies that were exposed to it throughout their growing up years, and so that would lead to the mesothelioma. But J&J, one of the things that J&J did decades ago was they began marketing the baby powder to women for feminine hygiene purposes, and that's what leads to the ovarian cancer development in women.
And so what's the status of that of those cases?
Okay. So we began filing cases. There were a string of verdicts in 2016, 2017, 2018, and then as more and more cases were being filed, J&J was facing more and more lawsuits and trials going forward. Then they pivoted and they filed bankruptcy. Not for J&J itself, but they did what's called the Texas two-step. And they take They take a subsidiary, they moved that subsidiary to Texas. They split that subsidiary in half. It's called a divisive merger. And they put all of the assets in one company, moved it back to New Jersey. They put all the liabilities, all of their talc liabilities into a separate subsidiary, and then moved that subsidiary overnight to North Carolina and filed bankruptcy in North Carolina for all of its talc liability, just that subsidiary. And so,
okay, so let me ask you this: why? What is it about Texas law that allows for that, as opposed to why don't they call it the Delaware two-step?
Yeah. So Texas in its business code has a provision that allows a company to divide, and they call it a merger. So it seems odd for sure, but it's really designed for this purpose. They split the company and they call it a merger, and that allows the company to do this, to put all of their assets in a company and their liabilities, and it is crazy.
So if I have student debt, let's say, and I am in arrears on my electric bill, and I haven't made my car payments, can I file in Texas that the Sam Seder that owes this stuff is a separate entity from the Sam Seder who's making money on the majority report, and then basically just say, like, good luck, guys,
from getting it from the
deadbeat Sam Seder?
Yeah, but
we can't, right?
You can't because of this. This is a bailout for the wealthy. So to do this, to go through the bankruptcy, it would cost hundreds of millions of dollars to, what J&J has spent hundreds of millions of dollars in this bankruptcy process. So for a student debt, it wouldn't make sense to go through that process. It's really a bailout for the wealthy corporations, and we've seen it
because they're on the hook.
They're on the hook.
Much more than $100 million.
Exactly. Exactly. They have to spend a lot of money, but they save tons more.
How much money has Johnson & Johnson made up until 2020 when they switched to cornstarch? How much money did they make from talc sales? Over the course of?
I don't know. It's a ton of money, because they've sold talc for it's 100 years, and so. But it's more than $1 billion. Yeah.
Multiple billions, right?
Yes. But it's not just the sales from the baby powder that's driving J&J and J&J's actions here. The company Johnson & Johnson, has lots and lots of products, medical products, pharmaceuticals, consumer products. They've got a lot. But it's baby powder that they consider their golden egg. It was their image.
Right.
The baby powder, I think, it's the most familiar smell in the world. It's up there. So it was their iconic brand. It was tied to their image. That was more of a driving force than just the sheer revenue from the baby powder.
It was image and reputation and
that's right.
And then why do they move to North Carolina? Why does the sort of Johnson minus Johnson essentially at that point, what do they call that company? Or is it?
Well, they called the company that they formed and moved to North Carolina was LTL, Legacy Talc Liability. So they moved that company.
That's
to North
the name
Carolina.
Of the company. That's very catchy.
LTL. Yeah. Exactly. But they moved it to North Carolina because North Carolina was known as a bankruptcy haven for asbestos liability companies. And so there were a number of cases that were pending, in North Carolina. North Carolina bankruptcy courts were favorable to those companies, and the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals was a favorable venue. So they moved there because the first Texas two-step was the Koch brothers in Georgia Pacific, and so there were several of those Texas two-step bankruptcies that were pending in North Carolina, and they bought these companies a tremendous amount of delay. It just stops all of those cases in their liability.
Is there a coincidence between Texas being the state where you can basically surgically remove as a corporation your liabilities from your assets. And then North Carolina, being a state where if you're just a company holding a bunch of liabilities, you can get some bankruptcy relief if it's around asbestos, with who controls those legislatures and who gets elected to the state courts and who the governor is. I mean, or is that just a coincidence?
I think that, I think that's more of a coincidence. I think that is,
I'm saying
that's
like,
a bankruptcy law firm, Jones Day, who created this this Texas two-step. I think that's them seeing, okay, what's available in Texas and what can we get in North Carolina and putting.
But is that
steps.
available in Texas because you have lawmakers who are creating an environment that is more amenable to corporate malfeasance in North Carolina? I mean, why isn't that happening? Why is just like why is Texas law so quirky and not, let's say, I don't know, Massachusetts?
Yeah, that's interesting, Sam. I mean, so we've had, some statements from some of the legislators that were involved in forming the Texas business code that allows that divisive merger, and they say that was not our intent. That was not the intended use of this statute. I think it is.
Can they go back and fix it?
Oh, they could. Hopefully they will. But I think more importantly, we need the U.S. Congress to step in, and there's some bills pending that would address some of the abuses in the bankruptcy.
But if your case is a federal case, why does state law? I mean, state law, I guess, allows them to change the nature of their entities, but they're still like, why can't you continue to hold, like, you can do all this in Texas, but we're suing you in federal court.
Right.
And as far as the federal court system is concerned, you still have this liability.
Right.
Why doesn't that
happen? It's not so much an issue of who has the liability. I mean, because Johnson & Johnson, I mean, we have the evidence to show Johnson & Johnson's on the hook. The parent company is on the hook, and we will continue to pursue that. But one of the most egregious aspects of bankruptcy here is that you have Johnson & Johnson, a $400 billion company, and they are getting the benefit of bankruptcy. So they file their subsidiary, and then the bankruptcy, one of the things that they ask for immediately in bankruptcy is stop all of the cases, not just against the debtor, that subsidiary LTL, now it's Red River in their third bankruptcy. We're now facing their third bankruptcy here in Texas, and it's a new subsidiary called Red River. But the bankruptcy courts stop all of the lawsuits, not only against that debtor, but against the parent company as well. So we could go forward. I mean, there is liability against Johnson & Johnson because they were the ones that were making these decisions, right. And so we can hold them liable. But the bankruptcy code and the bankruptcy courts are stopping all of the lawsuits. That's one of the most harmful aspects of this, and the most egregious is because they are using the bankruptcy to stop juries from holding them accountable for what they've done.
So you have tens of thousands of people out there who have gotten ovarian cancer from this talc,
yes,
and they have no recourse at this moment because the bankruptcy court is saying, these made up companies essentially,
right?
Their bankruptcy protection extends to Johnson & Johnson.
That's what we're fighting. So they moved to North Carolina, the North Carolina Bankruptcy Court. This was in their first bankruptcy. The North Carolina bankruptcy judge said, no, this case should be transferred to Johnson & Johnson's home base in New Jersey. So it was moved to the bankruptcy court in New Jersey. The bankruptcy judge in New Jersey, we filed to get it dismissed, saying they're not entitled to bankruptcy relief. The bankruptcy judge denied it, but we appealed it to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Third Circuit agreed with us. And so the Third Circuit ordered that the bankruptcy case be dismissed. Johnson & Johnson's not in, there's no financial distress here. You're not entitled to bankruptcy relief. So it was dismissed. 2 hours and 11 minutes after that bankruptcy case was dismissed, Johnson & Johnson filed again. They filed their second bankruptcy in that same court, and they had stripped about $30 billion in assets away from that subsidiary or from the funding agreement, and said, okay, now we've got financial distress. The bankruptcy, so we had to fight another motion to dismiss. This time the bankruptcy judge dismissed the bankruptcy. J&J appealed it to the Third Circuit. So there's been this delay after delay after delay, which is,
how does that end? Or is it just that the Johnson & Johnson realize, is it bad press? Is it I mean, it seems like they have an endless amount of money to spend on their attorneys.
Yeah, they do.
I mean, how does this cycle end?
Yeah. So now they filed their third bankruptcy, this time in Houston, and it would be in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal. So they're trying to get a different, hopefully we'll
this
get
audience
this
is familiar with the Fifth Circuit because it's, there's a lot of like jurisdiction shopping that's been going on for a lot of like corporate friendly, also, social issues in the Fifth Circuit.
So we have a hearing on a motion to transfer venue to try to get it transferred back to New Jersey, and that's tomorrow. And then we'll see what the bankruptcy judge does.
Why won't they just do number 4 and 5 and 6?
Yeah, I mean they could, unless somebody steps in. And so there are a couple of forces, hopefully, that will prevent that from happening. I mean, and one is Congress. So you have Congress that is considering. They have been watching what J&J has been doing, and there's some bills pending now that would
Where do
curtail.
those bills come out of? Like what
They would
committees?
come out of judiciary.
Okay.
The judiciary committees, and so hopefully those will gain momentum, especially now that J&J has done it for the third
Is
time.
there bipartisan support for these things?
Yes,
There is.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, and Sheldon Whitehouse, Dick Durbin. Have co-sponsored a bill in the Senate Judiciary. So there is bipartisan support, and it seems to be momentum as people are seeing the third time. Come on, you've got to be kidding me. So there's hopefully Congress will help stop the fourth when we get this one dismissed. And then there's also some pressure, I believe, from shareholders, and their investors are, they're fed up with this, J&J just continuing to, drag this out instead of because Johnson & Johnson clearly could do the right thing by these victims. They could.
I would
provide
imagine at one
compensation.
point too, like the more exposure this story gets, the worse it looks for Johnson & Johnson. I mean, you can protect the sort of like the image of the company with the baby powder, but not if people understand, because I don't think most people understand.
Right. I mean, the machinations that J&J has employed here in these bankruptcies, filing the third bankruptcy, some of the things that they did to try to manufacture a favorable vote among the creditors, the more that is exposed, I mean, the worse J&J's image is tarnished.
And one of the things that I would imagine a firm like yours has to do is you've got lawyers working on this. Johnson & Johnson has millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars where they have in-house lawyers and they bring in other counsel, and this is the cost of doing business. They may spend $100-200 million on lawyers, but they're saving multiple times that. From your perspective, you guys are doing this mostly on spec, right? I mean, so you've got to have a big reserve of cash. I mean, does a Johnson & Johnson look at a firm like yours? I mean, I know that's the difference. Like, one of the strengths that Levin Papantonio as a firm has is, was a firm that was involved in the tobacco settlement. So they have long-term, they have resources.
Yeah.
Does that like make a Johnson & Johnson, like if it was me and like I had a single shingle up and they just go, we're just going to bleed this guy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, what we're seeing here, I mean, it's a war of attrition. And I mean, that's what J&J is counting on. It's the same strategy that was employed by the tobacco companies in the tobacco litigation. We'll litigate you to death. And they're counting on the ovarian cancer, these cancer victims, just to grow tired and weary, and the lawyers that are representing them to grow tired and weary, and that they will take pennies on the dollar. But J&J has seriously underestimated the resolve of the cancer victims, and they've underestimated the resolve of the firms that are representing them.
Andy Birchfield, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Fascinating stuff.
Great to be with you, Sam.
Thanks. All right, folks, let me switch my camera back here. And we'll get back into it. Let's bring Emma back in. Thank you again.
Hello.
That's nuts. I wonder if most people know about that in terms of the
talcum powder.
Yeah. I mean, I think people probably noticed that it turned to cornstarch in the past couple of years. But I mean, this is the sort of, and I suspect I'm a little more skeptical of like where this bipartisan nature of this bankruptcy reform is going, but we'll see. Hopefully Democrats retain the Senate and we can sort of like eliminate the ability of corporations to do this. It's just one more aspect of like the corporate structure, which is so problematic, I think, in the context of our society. There are things that are good about corporations, obviously.
Yeah, they're people.
But I mean, they're associations of people. But the way it can function at arm's length when it's about a liability or a responsibility. And then the way that it's like closely held when it's about, we want to deny women health care in their insurance, or we need to be able as a corporation to give as much money as possible to our political system because that's freedom of speech. I mean, it's nuts. It would be, I would have far less problem with it if there was some measure of consistency in the way that the how corporations exist, but be that as it may, let's talk about let's get to 15.
You want to do that
here.
Hannity thing again?
Yeah. We were saying earlier that new report out from the Senate, who's been working on this report, I guess, for a couple of years, on the FBI's behavior in investigating the credible charges or accusations of Brett Kavanaugh being a sexual assault. There were two women. We heard from one,
Blasey Ford.
Blasey Ford, who testified at the Kavanaugh's hearing. There was a second woman who I believe knew him at Yale. And apparently there were a lot of other tips, but the White House was responsible for telling the FBI, do not investigate the question of his sexual assault charges. Now, I also imagine there may have been other areas where they said, do not investigate. We still never found out who paid off his mysterious, and I say mysterious,
ticket
debt? Because the huge baseball ticket debt in and of itself was weird, right? I mean, like you're a sports junkie, but you're racking up that kind of debt on baseball tickets. Something's weird about that.
Right. I mean, this isn't some guy that's, making minimum wage and maybe has a bit of a gambling problem or an addiction to sports. This guy is somebody who, I guess, in theory, had some right-wing benefactors. We know that Clarence Thomas did. That could be something that if we had an administration that wasn't fully in the tank for Brett Kavanaugh, that we could have looked into.
Well, wasn't that looked into under like a private Senate hearing or something like that? I forget. I think that was one of the things that was kept behind
there
closed
was
doors.
Something talked about there, and the question was like, who paid off that debt? But also, I don't know how much attention the idea of the debt itself. Like, that just sounds to me like a weird thing to have debt. And you wonder, all I can tell you this is one of the concerns that people have about, Donald Trump's watch deal. Have we talked about this?
Mm-hmm.
Trump is selling these watches, these Trump watches that are supposed to be high end. He's doing like the sale of he's selling some that are like $500, but he's also selling 147 of them that are $100,000.
And some watch experts have looked into it, like collectors and people who buy them as investments, and they've basically said this is the most insane ripoff you could imagine.
Haters.
They'll say things like, made in Switzerland or parts made in Switzerland, and you look it up, and yes, some of the parts are, but then they're sent to China to be assembled, and a majority of the most
You're playing the game called capitalism.
lucrative parts of these watches are manufactured in China. I mean, that matters for collectors for watches as things
These are
that
crappy
appreciate
watches.
in value.
They're crappy watches.
Like, but a fancy watch would not be a bad investment, but this is because it appreciates in value if it's rare or whatever. But Trump is literally just doing it to scam people because the value of the watch is like just a few $100s. What? No.
No.
No, what?
This is my point, because the watches are garbage. But if I have the ability to buy 147 watches at $100,000, I have the ability to put $14 million into Trump's pocket or campaign, let's say. And I may not want a watch. I may not care about the watch. I just want to figure out a way of getting money to them.
Oh, you're the guy who bought those watches?
I'm just saying that, and this is the same thing with the digital cards, right? It's just like a simple way, like, here's an excuse to give me money.
Right.
And I just think there's something fishy about just having that kind of baseball debt.
Like, it becomes a currency, maybe?
Yes.
It becomes a currency. It becomes some other way of transferring money. It becomes some other way of hiding other debts. Who knows? But here's the point. We can't know because the FBI was prevented from doing the sexual assault investigation. And I would bet my bottom dollar on every other investigation. There's no reason to believe that the White House didn't just say, you can investigate this. Like, did he cheat at squash? That's it. And, go to town on that. And so the reason why this becomes more relevant, or at least worth noting, is because this report came out from the Senate this week. But also there's this growing talking point on the right, because they realize in the run-up to the election that one of the things that's going to be driving the turnout and the vote this year is the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And so you have a guy who was credibly accused of committing sexual assault, we were told investigated by the FBI about it, but was not. Voting to get rid of an individual right that more or less half our population needed to protect their bodily autonomy. And so the right wing's sort of freaking out about it, and they're really going deep to try and figure out how to push back on this. Here is Sean Hannity addressing the question as to whether our government imposes some type of restrictions on men that are not imposed on women. And incidentally, I just should say this right up front. It's 2024.
Well, she sits down with the host of this Call Me Daddy podcast. And, what's interesting about this is she says, well, there are no laws that make a decision for a man's body. I want you to listen to this, and then ask yourself, well, wait a minute, are there laws that the government can make a decision for a man's body? I'll tell you on the other side.
I want to take a moment, and can we try to think of any law that gives the government the power?
I just wanted, this is important. I'm sure you've talked about this, Emma. I don't know if you talked about it in the past day or two, this podcast, right? I mean, this is a host that came off sort of a right-wing platform.
Barstool. They still do her merchandising, but she was able to leave, which is good for her.
And she is an apolitical podcaster. Totally. She had a big sort of like disclaimer before she had Harris on. She's also invited Trump on. Trump is never going to answer these questions, though. And the whole "call me daddy" is really like this.
Call
is,
her daddy, by the way.
It's
but-
called call
well,
her
the
daddy.
point is right, but the reason why they say "call me daddy" is because Hannity's trying to sort of like, this is titillating for his
100%.
old
Even that
man
title,
audience.
Well,
Yes.
but it's called that. It was originated in the Barstool universe to be a play on "Call Me Daddy,"
Yes.
and he's either subconsciously not getting it right because he's
or doesn't feel
a
comfortable.
horny weirdo, or he's just trying to signal what you're saying to his audience. I mean, this is his radio show when he's pretty lazy, so it's hard to discern.
All right, let's keep playing.
And can we try to think of any law that gives the government the power to make a decision? I know what you're going to ask. About a man's body.
Giggles.
No. Is there any law? No.
Linda, what would you call the draft? Would that be a decision the government makes that they draft young men? And I don't want them to draft women. And I don't know if that's been a big issue.
I would say, just against all human beings. I mean, think of all of our amazing military that lost their jobs after some of them had 30 and 40-year tenures in the military during the COVID vaccines and the mandates. I mean, that was against all human beings, male and female.
Well, they're making decisions over people's bodies all the time. And then, if you're going to send a guy into a war zone, if God forbid there's a war, men are going to be drafted and they're going to be told to put their bodies in harm's way. And the idea that abortion is this big issue, they're just lying about that too.
Wait, what?
There's just lying about that too.
So the COVID mandate, that's not really the point they're making about a gender specific against male
Although the
policy.
COVID mandate would be a little bit more current if you want to make a reference to bodily autonomy, because check the facts on the internet.
But the whole point is it's gender specific.
1973 was when we ended the draft, which was also the same year, by the way, that Roe v. Wade, the decision was handed down, just coincidentally. So he's really reaching back into the past here to find some law that has to do with men's bodies.
Also, men wrote the law that did the draft, so not exactly analogous.
Pretty exclusively, and like this is something you often you're seeing the Trump campaign and Republicans right now really borrow from talking points we've heard in the manosphere many times. The draft thing is consistently what incels and manosphere men's rights podcasts and activists talk about as the thing that is the major discrimination between men and women in our government. And again, you can't, like, we're going back to a law that has been defunct since 1973. Yep.
Indeed. All right. Well, listen, I have some more guests with us. Let's take just a quick break while I just get set up here, and we'll be back in just a moment. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. I am live at the Mass Torts Conference in Las Vegas, Nevada. And one of the, I've interviewed an array of attorneys over the past really decade at this event. We have a lot of attorneys who are bringing mass torts, obviously, against corporate malfeasance. And a lot of these attorneys are also civil rights attorneys. In the past, I've actually interviewed Fred Gray here, who was Rosa Parks' first attorney, of course. And joining me now, Brian Barr and Ben Crump, two attorneys who are working on the case of Roger Fortson, who was a U.S. airman killed by a Florida sheriff. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Sam.
If you guys could just lean into that a little bit there. Let's just, Ben, why don't we just start with you? Just give us the broad strokes of this case and where we're at.
Certainly. Roger Fortson was a senior U.S. airman who was an extraordinary young man. I mean, he came from a disadvantaged community, and he went to the military, the Air Force, to help his mother and his two younger siblings be able to improve their lot in life, to be able to have a better chance at achieving the American dream. And as I turn my great co-counsel attorney, Brian Barr, I mean, he was doing everything right. I mean, he was very focused, very committed, law-abiding. And one day, and I still can't believe it, all he did was open his door. There was a police officer who got called about a disturbance in his apartment complex. And we believe adamantly that they were at the wrong apartment. This young black military officer opened the door. He was a law-abiding citizen. He was on the video chat with his girlfriend with the earplugs. So we don't believe he really knew who was there. And so he got his gun that he was registered to own in the state of Florida. And you know, we believe in the state of Florida in the Second Amendment like it's the second commandment.
Right.
Everybody got guns. But he, unlike most, was trained by the military. He was very disciplined. He was very trained to handle weapons. And he kept his gun when he opened the door down by his side. The officer yelled the command, and before Roger could even comply, bam, 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 bam. Shot 6 shots, 2 of them hitting Roger, and he laid there dying, still trying to follow the officer's commands, because that was the kind of person he was. He was somebody who was respectful to law enforcement, and he followed commands because he learned that in the military. And when he was saying, drop the weapon after he had already shot him, Roger, some of his last words was, I already did. He still tried to comply with everything. And it's so very tragic because he was the light for his family, for his community.
Brian, what kind of what are the legal issues? Like what is the stand? I mean, you know, as Ben Crump just, you know, laid it out, like as a layperson, this seems like a fairly obvious miscarriage of justice. I mean, to say the least. What needs to happen in the context of from a legal standpoint?
Well, I mean, there's obviously going to be a lawsuit. We're in the process of doing the claims. You have to do an administrative process first in Florida before you can file the lawsuit. We're in the process of that. But the defense is going to be it was a reasonable use of force. That's what the officer is going to try and say. But I think it's pretty obvious by just how this whole thing is played out that there's no chance with that defense. I mean, he's been fired. The investigative report has come out that is the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Department found it was unreasonable use of force. He's now been charged.
So he's had a criminal. There's two tracks, right? There's the civil track and the criminal track.
He has been and the state attorney decided the evidence was so strong she didn't even need a grand jury. She charged him herself, and without a grand jury, which is very uncommon in Florida. So the evidence is strong, and I don't know if you've seen the tape, but it is just I'll never forget the first time I saw it.
There's no latent, there's no lag time.
No, we didn't know what we were going to see, and I remember Ben called me in to help. We go to this press conference, and we hadn't seen the body cam footage at that point in time. We had heard from a couple people that had heard things, and we thought we knew what had happened. We show up, we go to the sheriff's department. He says, I want to show you all the tape. We sit down and we watch the tape, and it was one of the most impactful things I have ever seen. I mean, to see this family who lost their brother, their son, the way this kid was lost, and they just saw it. I mean, you hate to use words like executed, but that's what it looked like. I mean, the officer bangs on the door. He's on a face chat. I don't know if he could hear him or not, but he bangs on the door, identifies himself. I mean, you hear that on the video. Sheriff's department opened the door. This is the middle of the day. He didn't know who it was. The sheriff is he's standing on the side of the door. So even if you look through the people, you wouldn't have been able to see him. Roger, on the third time, probably terrified. He's got this person banging on his door. He doesn't know what's going on. He has no reason for a cop to be at his door at that point in time. Opens the door, and I don't think the officer even had time to recognize he had a gun. But he had the gun pointed down. It was no threat. You're allowed to answer your door with a gun in Florida, whether it's a sheriff's. I'm not saying it's a good idea.
Right.
But you're allowed to do it. There was nothing illegal about what he was doing. And he doesn't even say drop the weapon before he shoots it. Shoots him 6 times. He hits the ground, and then he says, drop the weapon. And Roger says, I already did. Yep. I mean, and it happened. I don't see how you could even process he had a gun. And so I believe he just saw a young black man.
Yep.
And the officer got scared and shot him. And I've been telling you, it's that whole video just tells such a vivid story. There's supposed to be this big disturbance going on in that apartment. You hear birds chirping as he's standing there at the door. There's no disturbance going on there. And it's just, the whole thing makes no sense.
So Ben, tell us, like, what is obviously, like, whose liability? I mean, who is liable here? Because it's one thing to say, okay, this sheriff trigger happy, or this deputy, and he had some type of bias that was associated with this. I mean, it's, and you certainly, with the people that you have represented in the past, George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. I mean, the idea of this bias existing, that the calculus of black person adding gun or not gun immediately increases your chances of getting shot without like any hesitation. But who's liable here? Is it just the deputy, or is there a department that is failing to train people or to screen people or to do whatever they can to make sure that they can provide, the serve and protect services?
Yeah. Well, Sam, one of the things I implore all your audience to do is to go online and look at that video. It is riveting. I mean, his further command to him is get back or stand back. And Roger's compliant even with that. But he starts shooting instantaneously. And to answer your question directly, what Brian and Natalie and our legal team have acknowledged is that we do believe the Okaloosa Sheriff's Department is culpable. But we also believe that the apartment complex and their management company is responsible as well, because we believe that they directed the sheriff's deputy to the wrong apartment. Roger has never had an arrest, no criminal conviction. I mean, he's a law-abiding citizen. But after we did our research, what we did find was that there was a neighbor of his that had 5 domestic violence calls to his apartment unit. We believe they went to the wrong apartment at the direction of the apartment complex manager. And we believe the proximate cause is really goes back to them being wrong. And then obviously, I do too many of these cases, and it's always the question. It's undeniable. You can't get away from it. You ask yourself, if he was a white officer, would the deputy have shot?
Yeah.
A white officer in the military. Yeah. Yeah. And Brian, let me ask you this: like, what's the hope in terms of? I mean, obviously, for the family, nothing's going to make up for this death of Roger Fortson. But from a societal perspective, from a broader perspective, like how much of that is on your agenda in terms of like trying to change the way all of this happens? Like
that is the agenda. I mean, because like you said, I mean, there's no amount of money that you could pay Roger's mother that she would accept, and she wants him back. I mean, that's what she wants, but she understands that's not realistic. What she wants is to be another person that stands in the gate and says, no more, no more. And we have got to change the way we police in this country, the way we train officers in this country. It's a hard job. And I don't think any of us sitting here would say that being an officer is an easy job. It's clearly a hard job, but they've got to do a better job training these people. They've got to do a better job identifying people who are more likely to shoot. And this department in particular has had multiple issues like this. This isn't the only one. I mean, there was a shooting a year prior to this. Thankfully, they didn't hit the guy, but there was a man they had arrested. He was in the back seat of the car. An acorn fell and hit the car.
Oh, I saw this.
And the cop unloaded into the car.
Yeah, and he started to do like a tactical role, and
that's what's going on at this sheriff's department, which tells you they are not training correctly.
Do you think, I'm curious, I mean, aside from obviously training and some type of vetting process that's a little bit more, do you think also, where are both of you, either one of you have thoughts on the scope of what we ask of police officers to do? The idea that was promulgated, during the Black Lives Matters protest, the idea of essentially redistributing some of the responsibilities and some of the funding from the police department to other social services, people who are not, it's one thing to say you need to, it's a lot to ask of an individual to be both a, someone who's going to be fighting crime, but also involved in social services, also involved in all these other things. And, some people would argue these are two different, you're trying to train people to do two different things that are not necessarily diametrically opposed, but work against each other on some level. If there is a complaint of domestic violence, maybe the lead person there should be, instead of two police officers, maybe one of the persons is a social service person, and they're accompanied by police backup.
Yeah, and why don't I take this one, Brian? I've testified before the U.S. Congress and the Senate on these issues about these departments of public safety being able to have resources, not just for police officers who oftentimes are called to deal with criminal matters. Their mentality is to make you comply, and if you don't comply, to use necessary force, even up into deadly force. Well, how about on a domestic violence call or a mental health call in particular, which they get called a lot? Instead of having a law enforcement officer trying to de-escalate a situation with a person who is having this mental health crisis. You have a mental health counselor who's there either taking lead or working in concert with the law enforcement social work issues. I mean, many times, unfortunately, you have domestic violence situations or you have altercations between people that don't need somebody to put a gun in their face. What they need somebody to do is to say, let's talk about this. And officers aren't trained to do that kind of stuff. But if we use just not even a large portion, probably a small percentage of it, to say when we have these 911 calls, let's have a social worker go with the officers. I mean, how hard is that to act? Somebody who has diplomatic negotiation skills.
It also feels like we don't need armed people to issue tickets for running a red light or for having I mean, in New York City, we have and everywhere you have people going around issuing tickets.
Don't get me started.
Well,
man,
I mean,
because the reality is this here. The majority of black people and brown people who are killed by the police in America starts with traffic stops. Traffic stops. And the majority of them are unarmed, but yet they end up dead. And so I don't know. I've said this, Brian. I don't know if you thought something of you. I mean, they shoot so many black men running away from them in the back. It's almost like a cliche. And it seems to me that one of the most dangerous things in America to police officers are black men running away from you.
Right.
I mean, how are you a threat when I'm trying to get away from you? But yet they do it and then they justify it. And you don't see them. I wrote a book in it, chapter 2, open season, and it's titled, "The Police Don't Shoot White Men in the Back," because it's so rare. If ever they shoot a white man in the back running away, they ain't gonna do it because they know there will be circumstances and consequences. But with minorities, not so much.
And again, to me, it goes back. We've got to change the way we police in this country. I mean, do we need police departments to have tanks? I mean, you see them roll down the streets in these armored vehicles, and they're carrying. It's like, why take some of that funding and put it into the social services side where we know it's desperately needed? I mean, why are we doing things like no-knock warrants? You know, the Breonna Taylor thing. Why? I mean, hell, if somebody kicked my door in at night, I don't know who it is. You know, got a gun at my bedside, I'm probably going to grab it. Now, I have a better chance of surviving that situation because I'm a white guy, but that is a reasonable reaction. Somebody kicks your door in that late, and why are we doing that? That doesn't make any sense. And that's the way we police. We've got to change our mindset on how we're doing it, or we're just going to keep killing people.
Well, Brian Barr, Ben Crump, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. We'll be following this case, and thank you for your time. I don't know if there's anything else you want to just
want to say thank you, Sam, for covering this important case because Roger Fortson deserves to be alive today.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam.
All right, folks, let me just switch back to this camera angle. There we go. Emma will jump back in, continuing on with our show. Like I say, I didn't, I wasn't sure we were going to be getting at any moment, but real pleasure to talk to both those guys. Really an incredible case. It's such a disturbing video too to watch. But again, there's a lot of different ways in which, dispositionally and tonally to address it, it seems to me. But the material aspects of having police officers do things and bring, and I suppose, there's an opportunity to sort of train people better and vet better. But at the end of the day, what you need to do is have a structural change as to when these people and how they are deployed. And that means taking resources, shifting them in the way that a city government, state government expends these resources and putting the money towards people who can address situations. You don't need an armed person to ticket somebody for speeding.
Traffic stop. Yep.
You don't. I mean, let's just walk through this. There's a reason why, like when a meter, like a parking ticket person comes up to a car, people get hostile. People get mad at them. They write down the license plate. The people drive off. They still have the ticket to issue. They don't have guns.
Right.
They don't have guns. It's the exact same scenario. Car, person, and, violation officer who's there to ticket them. If there is a high-speed chase and bank robbers are speeding through, then maybe you have, you deploy the armed police. But if it's somebody who's just issuing tickets, the reason why it's dangerous for police officers when they approach a car that they have stopped is because they're carrying a gun.
Yep.
This is why it's not dangerous for ticket issuers, who will often have people will come up and go, "Don't ticket my car." The reason why it's dangerous for police officers is because they have a gun. And if anybody being pulled over, regardless of what they're doing, if the idea is you're pulling them over for a moving violation, and that person driving knows that person doesn't have a gun, and all they're going to do is get a ticket, or they're going to say I'm not stopping. Well, the same situation is with armed police officers, or I'm going to drive off. The ticket, the issuer steps aside, has the license plate already written down because they get out of the car. They've already, this is the type of stuff that we're talking about.
You're thinking you don't want it where somebody gets pulled over for a turn signal out and all of a sudden has to look around them and decide, is it worth it to avoid my warrants to put everybody around me in jeopardy? Yeah, I think it's
that's
silly.
The point. It's okay, and I don't know how many, dangerous criminals we take off the street because of, a blinker violation or something. But I would imagine it's not that many. And it's far more dangerous for the police officers because they've got a gun. Far more dangerous for a lot of innocent people, I don't know, you say guilty of going 65 in a 55-mile-an-hour zone or something like that. But that's that. Steve Austin on the IM says the paramedics began as part of the fire departments. Maybe our police department should begin pilot programs to develop a new branch of first responders that would answer the call in primary position for domestic disturbance calls, mental distress calls. Exactly. I mean, all this is going to come ultimately from some type of legislative and societal push. In the wake of the George Floyd killing, we haven't gotten there yet.
I mean,
That's
I remember
just
I was in Spain 2 years ago, and there was all these sort of vans that seemed semi-official, and I looked up what they were, and it was specifically people deployed to deal with situations of mental unwellness or unhoused folks in desperate circumstances, specifically not armed, troops going out and trying to solve a problem with a gun.
Right.
And it's hard to say at that point whether you would save a Roger Fortson if there was a fundamental difference in how we deploy police officers, right? If they had a much narrower portfolio, there's definitely reason to believe that they would be able to be trained for a much more specific situation and handle them differently, right? But when you throw
less.
when you throw 30 tasks at somebody that's on their job requirements, they're not going to do them all as well. I mean, that's just the bottom line. All right, let's change topics. We've got there's so many issues involved with this hurricane that's barreling towards Florida now. Still, by the last check, it's back up to a category 4. I don't know. Have you guys heard anything different at this point?
It's been a category 5. The hope is that when it reaches landfall, it's a category 4 by that point. But either way, we're talking about one of the strongest storms to hit Florida in my lifetime.
Let's keep in mind,
New York Times live coverage is saying as of now it's a category 4 leading to its landfall.
Now, let's be clear though, that this juncture, as of Monday, the anticipation was at this juncture it would be closer to a category 3.
Right.
And it looked like it was losing steam, and then it sort of jumped back up. So we really don't know. We spoke about earlier, we played that clip of the mayor from Monday. We have no response as a society in terms of providing evacuation notices. Providing evacuation services, making it possible for people to evacuate. Which, in many ways, these storms are like COVID in that they expose and heighten failures that we have within our society that already exist, right? Like what happens to your health care if you're not going into work? What happens to, what happens with education when we have families who don't have the same technology or money to spend on technology? In this instance, what happens to people who don't have the money to rent another apartment, to own a car to drive out of town, to maybe they're disabled and don't have access to these things? I mean, these moments of crises expose the weaknesses that we have that exist in society. Invariably, they're all around money because of the way that our society is structured. And we're going to have to address things for non-crisis periods of time to make us more durable and strong enough to sustain through crises. And one of the problems that we also have at this point is, as a society, a complete misunderstanding of what happens in Congress, how things get funded, what services the federal government provides, et cetera, et cetera. Just contemplate this. Donald Trump wanted to get rid of the entire federal government's apparatus to track hurricanes. He wanted to open the door for private corporations to do this work, which means it's behind a paywall. Just contemplate that for a moment. And we know the Republicans, under him, he wanted to cut FEMA. The Republicans refused about another, $10 billion of supplemental aid just a month ago to the FEMA budget. And then the super effed up notion about it is they will lie with essentially impunity. I'm not saying they should be punished, but there's no accountability for it within their own sort of ecospheres as to, I'm sure you've went over this the past couple of days, payments to people who suffered in Helene.
Yep.
There's no accountability in the sense that Ron DeSantis outlawed the use of the words climate change in all of their sort of governmental edicts. How do you address these things? And so here is the, essentially, Harris tried to apparently call DeSantis in the run-up to Milton. to offer support, find out what he needs, et cetera, et cetera. Here she is basically retelling the story.
President, Governor DeSantis, NBC is reporting Governor DeSantis is ignoring your calls on hurricanes, resources, and help. How does that hurt the situation here?
You know, moments of crisis, if nothing else, should really be the moment that anyone who calls themselves a leader says they're going to put politics aside and put the people first. People are in desperate need of support right now, and playing political games at this moment in these crisis situations, these are the height of emergency situations, is just utterly irresponsible, and it is selfish, and it is about political gamesmanship instead of doing the job that you took an oath to do, which is to put the people first.
I mean, it's interesting because if you recall, Chris Christie, the governor of the state I grew up in, was photographed during Hurricane Sandy, basically putting his arm around President Obama because Obama mobilized the federal government to help New Jersey in the wake of Hurricane Sandy. And that, I don't know, you can't like go back in time and say that's what killed his chances in terms of his 2016 presidential ambitions. But at the very least, the base reacted to it in such an insane way. Like, how dare you touch Satan incarnate, Chris Christie?
A black guy.
Well, I mean, one and the same for the base. But like, before Trump came on the scene as the guy that was gonna talk tough and be the bully, I mean, that was Chris Christie's whole persona, an East Coast Republican that likes to talk a bunch of shit. And he cratered under that. And so DeSantis is trying to go the opposite way, and he's making a show of not taking Harris's calls. But Harris is also making a show of the fact that he didn't take her calls, which she should, because they are playing politics. But this should be a moment where we're also talking about, like, Republicans are uninterested for the most part in building up systems that will mitigate the harms of this in the future. Brian Kemp
because if you do that,
yeah,
you're conceding that there's something going on now, which they also don't want to address.
Right. And you know, it also gets in the way, I think, right now of her now 2-month-long campaign for moderate Republican voters. But you know, that is the reality. And Trump had been trying to do this and force Brian Kemp into lying to say that Biden hadn't been answering calls from, that Biden hadn't called, yes, that was true, answered calls from Brian Kemp, Georgia's governor, in the response to Hurricane Helene. I don't know what the salience of this is anymore. It's just like, how can we get through to an electorate on the Republican side that thinks climate change is a hoax and like just seems to take the results of these extreme weather patterns at face value, and then these Republican governors proudly don't do anything for them?
Well, you know, I mean, let me just preface this by saying I am sympathetic to the plight of a politician 30 days out less from an election trying to get elected. But at one point, Democratic politicians, and I don't anticipate that all will do this or that half, but some need to not be afraid of politicizing these things. And I don't mean like politics as a catty sport, politics as is like selfish, but take this opportunity. And I understand at this moment it might be impossible to do. And so, you know, don't misinterpret. Some people are going to be like, you know, a little bit oversensitive to this. But these are the opportunities to explain to people that there are, certainly in this in this realm. I mean, even Bill Clinton was, one of his best achievements was to basically rebuild FEMA. And George Bush came in and started to privatize all these services again. That's when they talk about cutting FEMA, that's what they want to do. They want these to be private services.
And we saw how that worked out with Katrina, by the way.
Exactly. And you want to take the opportunity to express to people, like, this is what society is about. Tampa Bay cannot, or Tampa cannot address this on its own. Nor can, the state of Florida, frankly, address this on its own. The whole strength of having a country as large and as wealthy as ours is that we have the ability to respond to these crises that don't hit everybody, that hit. And part of it is you don't know if you're going to be one of those people. It's the same concept behind single payer health insurance, frankly. 80% of healthcare costs are borne by 20% of the people, but we don't know which 20% this is going to be. We don't know if it's today, it's Tampa getting hit by Milton, or, in a year, whether it's going to be, I don't know, Craryville in upstate New York up in the mountains or something, or Asheville, or it's going to be, an extreme drought. We don't know where these crises are going to hit. And this is an opportunity for politicians to say this is a fundamental difference between the policy orientation of these two parties. One understands that our strength as a country, our strength as being this rich, is that we can help people when they are in crises. And one of the ways that we can help people when they're in crises is to mitigate these crises before they happen. That means build a public transportation system so that people can't evacuate. That means mitigate, to the extent that we can now, the forces that are driving climate change. That means provide healthcare, provide resources so that if somebody actually does have to evacuate and go rent a hotel at an exorbitant fee, 15 hours away, they're going to have at least some savings and some ability to do so because other aspects of their necessities in their lives have been decommodified. I mean, this is a missed opportunity that way. And I'll tell you something, you look at the polling on immigration right now, and the turnaround of where the American public at is nuts.
Yeah.
And
it's also a global phenomenon, I'll say, too. Like, this is a failure of, like, the left more broadly. And I don't know, I mean, liberal parties aren't really the left. But in Europe, the right is just much more organized around this particular topic of nativism. And they've successfully incorporated Orban-style politics about this into right-wing parties throughout Europe and North America.
I think that's true. But America has a very, a unique relationship with immigrants relative to Europe, right? I mean, this country literally was built.
Yes.
There was no Americans 250 years ago. And this country was uniquely built. And the speed in which this turnabout happened, far more rapid in this country than in a European country. This has been a problem in Europe for, at least a decade. This is change of the past 2 or 3 years. And I would contend it is a function of essentially Democrats leaving a vacuum, moving to the right on this as a way, instead of actually engaging in the rhetorical battle, they attempted to do what was the easy thing to do in this instance, and attempt to placate this and assuage these fears, instead of actually challenging the existence of these fears. And in the short run, it may help you. In the long run, you're never going to be as fashy on immigrants as the Republicans. They're just going to move more to the right on this, where they're talking about, mass deportations. And you've left a vacuum here that is going to end up both hurting you politically, but also in terms of economically, frankly. And I think that's just a question of justice.
It's a failure of liberalism to be able to combat fascism. I mean, this is something I think we've talked about many times. Like, the United States is unique in that it's a massive settler colonial society, different than Europe. And so, but I do think that some of those problems remain. The Democrats, like, they are, this is what happens when they're basically doing campaigns, and Harris's campaign, it's almost as if, given that she took over the Biden campaign infrastructure, I'm not sure she had too much of a choice, and this is the path they've gone down, but it's just, everything's from a focus testing perspective. Run to the right on these issues, solidify your base to the right, and they haven't built up mechanisms to do the opposite. The party, while it's in a better position in terms of like delivering for people, the strategies long term to beat back fascism is not. They are very poorly equipped. I worry about whatever this like they could win in the fall. But if they don't adjust their strategy for a post-Trump world, we're in deep trouble.
Let's play this other clip. This is Ron DeSantis now going on and telling Sean Hannity that, and remember, she was asked a question because of reports that DeSantis was not taking a call. I mean, those reports, without a doubt, came from DeSantis's people. Because
totally,
you don't want to, be perceived as having been, shut down by the governor of Florida, and this is all part of a larger strategy of DeSantis to help Trump. But here he is on Sean Hannity's program.
I saw the statement from your office. Number one, you did not hear about a call from Kamala. You would have taken the call, you said. I had you on my radio and TV show before Helene hit. You told me, and I had Governor Kemp on, and he
Pause
told
it for
me
one
in your
second.
case.
I just want you to contemplate how most people would judge a governor whose office is so effed up that he can't find out that he got a call from the vice president.
And that you had to clarify, like, hey, would you ignore that call or would you take it? Hypothetically speaking, of course.
I mean, it came up as spam. So
honestly, like, what's going on? Like, oh, well, I'm sorry. Like, who's answering the phone? Like, just like an intern? Like, I'm in the middle of doing a practical joke where I'm actually signing Ron DeSantis up for adult friend finder, so I can't pass on your call. Like, who is this person in his office that is not passing on that the vice president's on the phone? All right,
it's silly.
Lean hit. You told me, and I had Governor Kemp on, and he told me in your case, you had 30,000 utility trucks staged to go in right after the hurricane. You had food, water, medicine, supplies ready to go right in behind the hurricane. As usual, I'm assuming you have the same thing for Milton. Am I wrong, Governor?
No, you're right. And Hurricane Helene was a Category 4 storm. It did significant damage to the state of Florida. We've been on this footing now for 2 weeks straight in terms of preparation response. And now we have an even bigger storm that's bearing down, as you pointed out, in a very populated area, potentially could do even more damage. And we've been laser focused on leveraging all resources available, including from the federal government. And I've been in touch with both FEMA and the president, as well as marshaling all our state agencies and working to support our local communities. And so for Kamala Harris to try to say that my sole focus on the people of Florida is somehow selfish is delusional. She has no role in this. In fact, she's been vice president for 3.5 years. I've dealt with a number of storms under this administration. She has never contributed anything to any of these efforts. And so what I think is selfish.
All right, pause it, please, because this is my favorite thing that I love to see them watch to thread this needle. She's been vice president for 3.5 years. Why hasn't she done any of these things that she says she's going to do already? Also, in those 3.5 years, she had no role in any of the hurricane responses because VP is basically a ceremonial role. How do you square those two things? The second
But
is the
she's
reality.
also responsible for everything else that the administration has done.
I mean, the second is the reality, right? Which is that I don't think Biden was really leaning on Harris for basically any input. There's a lot of reporting that shows that she was sidelined for a good part of the administration, and that's typically how things work with VPs. They're not they're mostly ceremonial.
I thought
and
they were a team, and he respected her opinion.
Yeah, they made a whole freaking TV show about it, a Veep, about the frustration of being a vice president in that regard. But like, you can't do both. Either she's responsible for the disasters of the Biden administration because she was so intimately involved in the Biden administration, or she had, no role, as he's basically saying at that point. The reality is that she's calling, one, because she wanted to see if he'd take his call, and then maybe she could make something political out of it. But two, if she were to win, she would be the president. So this is the kind of thing when you're doing a transition period that would make total sense.
Well, and she's trying to see how I can reach across the aisle. Like,
yes.
That's actually she's not doing it. She's sincere, actually, about that.
I would also add that DeSantis does not have unlimited access to Joe Biden. You may speak to Biden on a Monday. You may be having problems with FEMA on Tuesday. Like, we need more tractor trailers or whatever it is.
Right.
I need more front loaders. I need more, whatever it is. I need more sand. I need this. And Harris comes in, says, I'm available, accessible to you. If you need something, obviously, as vice president, I have the ability to make a lot of that happen. I can call FEMA and say, we need more trucks down there. I want to see more trucks. She's a member of this federal administration. So there is the idea that there's no value in that for a governor is absurd. It's just patently absurd. Like, this is just the way that bureaucracies work. I mean, everybody knows this.
But these are the limits, like, for him, in terms of blaming upward. He's the chief executive of the state of Florida, right? So when there's a failure in response to some sort of disaster in this way, how else are you going to direct the blame? They're going to try to channel it into the election in the fall. But the reality of the situation is, like, this is how a Republican executive of one of the most populous states in the country functions in their response. It's not adequate because they don't really believe in government. So when
maybe the state most at risk for climate change
shouldn't have somebody with that ideology to lead them, but he can't fight on those terms.
All right, let's turn from. Oh wait, we haven't finished. Have we finished that clip?
I don't. There's a little more. Yeah.
No, forget it. Let's move on, because I want to turn from cataclysmic climate change to possibly cataclysmic massive war in the Middle East.
Oh.
Bibi Netanyahu went out and gave a speech about Lebanon. Weirdly, this one's in English.
Huh.
So you get a sense of who the target audience is. Understand that reportedly today, Joe Biden is speaking with Netanyahu, apparently for the first time since like August, if that's possible.
That he remembers.
And they are discussing where Israel's going to be attacking Iran. The U.S. has reportedly said, essentially, we'll give you money not to hit the most sensitive Iranian sites. Basically, the idea is like, we'll pay you to simply do what the Iranians did, which was to largely avoid casualties.
They hit military targets. They bombed close to things like the Mossad headquarters. And the only person that died ended up being a Palestinian, I believe, in the occupied West Bank, which Israel doesn't give a crap about, obviously.
And we also know that Israel was aware of where they were going to hit. So the Mossad office was evacuated prior to the bombing, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, this was a symbolic attack as far as these things go. U.S. is offering to pay Netanyahu. Let's listen to his speechifying on why they have again invaded, or I should say bombed partial invasion of Lebanon. And keep in mind that Netanyahu's probably biggest consideration about attacking Iran is what will do the most damage or help Donald Trump in this election. So he's trying to figure out what's the best time for me to do this. What time does the political science say that something like this will have the most impact on the election? But here he is.
This is a message to the people of Lebanon. Do you remember when your country was called the Pearl of the Middle East? I do. So what happened to Lebanon? A gang of tyrants and terrorists destroyed it. That's what happened. Lebanon was once known for its tolerance, for its beauty. Today, it's a place of chaos, a place of war. Israel withdrew from Lebanon 25 years ago, but the country that actually conquered Lebanon is not Israel, it's Iran. Iran, which finances and arms Hezbollah to serve Iran's interests at Lebanon's expense. Hezbollah has turned Lebanon into a stockpile of ammunition and weapons and a forward Iranian military base. Just one day after the October 7th massacre a year ago, Hezbollah joined the war against Israel.
Can we pause it for a second, just so I can give you a little bit of history?
It has since fired over.
It is so rich for this guy to be talking about. Do you remember when Lebanon was the jewel of the Middle East, the pearl of Middle East? And then after we stopped occupying it in 25 years ago,
because Hezbollah forced us out. Yeah,
Hezbollah was created in the wake of the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon. This is, I've mentioned this before. I was there as a kid during that summer, 15, 16 years old. And we were in Caesarea and we saw the attack helicopters, a ton of them going up low on the coast. Ultimately, we found out to bomb Lebanon, to bomb Beirut, I should say. And just a coincidence, but from there, I think it was at the beginning of sort of some of the skepticism I had as a kid about what was going on with Israel. But the idea of like, it was the pearl of the Middle East. And then we left a power vacuum after we went in there that allowed Hezbollah to grow into such a force.
And can you imagine if, like, after October 7th, where Hamas basically said to the people of Israel, and they had the capability to do this, please, you need, we need to, for your own safety and security, invade. Please take back your country. This was some of what Netanyahu was saying to support the Bush's administration's illegal war in Iraq, where he bolstered the idea that the United States would be greeted as liberators. If we just took out Saddam, Iraq could go back to the Iraqi people. This is not about our imperialist aims. This is about the good of the Iraqi people. He's saying the same thing about Lebanon in this speech. And, you know, we don't talk about it in these terms, but if you saw what Beirut looked like, September 23rd, I believe, was the date that they basically bombed the hell out of Beirut. Equivalent, if not, I think more, civilian casualties than the day of October 7th. And the fact that you don't hear about September 23rd over and over again, September 23rd, but we hear about October 7th every single day to justify continued slaughter, not just in Gaza, where 99 American doctors and nurses say that over 118,000 people minimum are dead. That's 5.4% of the population, and that's the minimum, they say. The fact that we don't hear about that every day says everything you need to know about what is being used as propaganda to justify slaughter.
Let's listen.
After the October 7th massacre a year ago, Hezbollah joined the war against Israel. It launched an unprovoked attack on our cities and on our citizens. It has since fired over 8,000 missiles at Israel, killing civilians.
I'm sorry, just really quickly. Just unprovoked. They did 2 terrorist attacks in Lebanon. First of all, Iran didn't respond when they killed the lead negotiator for Hamas in Tehran, the capital of Iran. Okay. Then they did pager attacks, coordinated bombing campaigns all throughout Lebanon. Then another walkie-talkie coordinated bombing campaign all throughout Lebanon. Then they started bombing right on the outskirts of Beirut. And then Hezbollah was sending rockets back. Just like insanity to call this unprovoked.
The denial of provocation is a hallmark. Let's say that.
Over 8,000 missiles at Israel, killing civilians without distinctions, Jews, Christians, Muslims, and Druze.
Oh, wow.
Israel has decided to put an end to this. We've decided to do whatever is necessary to return our people safely to their homes. Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel also has a right to win. And Israel will win.
Has a right to win.
We've degraded Hezbollah's capabilities. We took out thousands of terrorists, including Nasrallah himself, and Nasrallah's replacement, and the replacement of his replacement.
Unconfirmed.
Today, Hezbollah is weaker than it's been for many, many years.
Well, pause.
Now you,
I mean,
the Lebanese people,
I don't know how much more of his propaganda. I mean, he wants to speak it in English, but the Orientalism that's involved in this idea, and we went through this in Iraq too, where every couple of weeks we were taking out the Al Qaeda's number 2. Like there was always like a new number 2, and this is the same dynamic. There is no doubt Israel has the capacity to assassinate Hezbollah leaders, but the idea that these are, sort of like a gang of, like a Game of Thrones, like the Khazar, whatever it is, like the Khalisi, the Khalazar. And if we take out the Khalazar, the army will they won't know where to go and this and that. This is like sort of just Orientalism. It is really just this notion that there's no infrastructure. This is Hezbollah is essentially because Lebanon has been so devastated. And look, I'm no fan of Hezbollah's. There's a lot of people in Lebanon who are happy to see Hezbollah's power downgraded, I'm sure. But the fact of the matter is this is not, some movie version of like a Game of Thrones where if you just get rid of the leader. I mean, the fact that you have to say like we got rid of Nasrallah and then we got rid of the person who replaced him and we got rid of the person who replaced him, like this is the dynamic.
And Al Qaeda, we've seen this show before.
And whatever, even if you take out every Hamas fighter and every Hezbollah fighter, which is impossible, but say you were able to do that, does that even matter? Because a new resistance group will form and it'll just be called something different. And like Hezbollah is, as you say, Sam, there is just this racism about it, truly, where like they're just basically barbarians who want to taste Israeli blood and they will stop at nothing else, as opposed to Hezbollah being like a major political party within Lebanon that also provides civil services and has civilian infrastructure and has a leadership structure that can maintain itself even if you take out the big bad, in the same way that any major political party in other countries would be able to do the same. But because they're basically, in the way that the West characterizes people in the Middle East, animals on a good day, then they think that they can get away with this kind of dehumanization.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Bibi is objectively a terrorist, and a lot of sort of leaders of the IDF and all that stuff. I still think the solution is international diplomacy and not just razing their cities with civilians in them.
Let's buckets and buckets. Didn't Hezbollah start firing rockets on October 8th? Well, I would say Hezbollah and Israel have been trading rockets a lot earlier than October 8th. But yes, my understanding is that on October 8th, Hezbollah did fire rockets, not necessarily into Israel, into Sheba Farms, which is occupied territory, Israeli occupied territory of Lebanon.
And
So
Israel has an Iron
technically
Dome.
they fired.
Yes.
Technically they fired rockets, but not necessarily whether they fire them into Israel is or occupied territory is really the issue.
relevant.
And it's just like such a facile like view of this kind of stuff. Hezbollah understands that Israel has the most advanced missile defense system that you could basically buy because the United States provides them with the Iron Dome. They do this as a show of force and solidarity with the people of Palestine and Gaza who were about to be genocided. Yes, that's what they did.
Should we do Biden at this press briefing? It's from October 4th. I don't know
Maybe
if
we
need
just
to see that.
Yeah, we save that for tomorrow.
You
It
got
was a
this really-
shockingly arrogant.
Oh, he's being an old asshole again?
Yeah, he keeps
Crazy.
bragging to The View and to the press that he's best friends with Netanyahu and loves him, and he wrote him a little note. I mean, I don't even we talk about levels of appeasement here. It's just historic failure. So,
Is this number 11 worth a while or 12?
I mean, we're close to the end of the show, I think. So that's just the one
All right.
thing.
All right, let's read a couple IMs and then we'll wrap things up. We'll have a couple more guests on some of these cases tomorrow. Really interested in what's going on with social media because we're going to see some type of change in Section 230 would be my guess. Sarah from Wallingford, which political movement fought against the draft? It was the feminists. That's back from the Sean Hannity thing. John from the T-Bird, love that they bring up the draft as if people don't dislike the draft.
I know.
Calling from Connecticut, it was the Republican lawyer whose first question Brett pulled up his calendar, which had the date he did it marked. It was on a Thursday, then put that out. I'm not quite sure I follow that. Dave from Jamaica, wait, isn't the draft not a thing anymore? Jimmy Dore's joke writer, by Hannity's own logic, being pro-choice and anti-draft is a totally consistent position with being against laws that impinge upon bodily autonomy. Yeah, it's sort of, I think it's really more of an attempt to say men are aggrieved.
Mm-hmm.
Wade from Indiana.
50 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Although
Wade
I
from-
will, sorry, I just do want to say the Democrats should provide a little bit more in terms of men, younger men in particular, not being able to live up to these breadwinner standards that previous men and generations have had. They're totally diverting people's attention into just being incel freaks that hate women and whatever. But there is a lot of pain there, I think, in terms of the economy that the Democrats are. The stratification in terms of male voters versus female voters, even amongst young people with Trump and Harris, is starker than it should be.
Yeah,
I'm
something
sorry
like
about
a climate corps where men and women, young men and women could join, I think would maybe be a good thing. Maybe give some meaning in people's lives besides work for a marketing firm or commercial surveillance organization or AI or some goddamn shit.
Yeah, maybe Harris will remember she supported the Green New Deal at one point.
Jack's Rude Hoy. I randomly got a 90s C. Thomas Howell neo-noir movie from the library and had the very surprising experience of watching a babyface Sam Seder get taken out in a drive-by shooting by the big bad guy of the film.
Oh, wow.
Well acted. Have you guys ever, I've talked about that, right? It's called The
Big Fall?
The Big Fall.
This is the first time hearing of
I'm
this.
going to check that out.
Oh
later.
gosh, it is
4.3 out of 10 on IMDb.
You know what? That's generous. That's very generous, actually. C.
Wow,
Thomas
you
Howell.
are fourth billing.
Yeah, C. Thomas Howell directed the film, and he. I'm trying to think. He said something to me that was really sort of dude, you don't realize what you're saying. Hey Sam, it's great to meet you. I'm really, I was really looking for someone who could be really sort of Jewishy. And I was like, oh, great. Well, that's me. And
You know what your
I'll
name
put on
was?
my Jewishy glasses. And
Yeah, do you remember what your name was, the character?
No.
Gary Schneider.
Oh my God. And I played, I feel like I played an accountant or somebody. I think he was like a private eye. It was all just sort of like, he sort of talked like this a little bit. And it was sort of a throwback. I mean, he got all the funding from like Europe or Asia, and his dad was a stunt man or stunt director. And so there was a lot of like, he had a lot of stunt resources. And my character gets shot and shot through a plate glass window. I don't
that's the one
ruin
you
it.
told me about. Right,
Yep.
right.
Oh yeah, I've seen this now. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Wow,
And
it's in the yeah.
Kathy Griffin was in it. And there's a story about, I was doing a sitcom at the time, a pilot, and I was having a sex scene, you know, to the extent that you could in a sitcom, but we had to. She was wearing a bra and I was wearing just my underwear, and I was really nervous about it. It was coming up, and I was doing the movie at the same time, sort of simultaneously while we were, rehearsing the sitcom. And I said to him, because he had been in a bunch of sex scenes, like, he was a very hot actor at one point. And I said, what do you do? Like, I'm a little bit nervous. I've never been in a situation like this. And he's like, oh, just let it rip. They should be grateful. They should be taken as a compliment. You worry about like, I just remember
let
that.
it rip? What the hell does that mean?
Well, you're nervous as a 27-year-old actor, whatever
No,
I
I
was.
understand the implication, right? But what does it mean to let it
He
rip?
said,
Just
don't
like,
worry.
Don't
Don't-
worry if that's going to happen.
Yeah, don't worry about it. If it happens, it happens, and just it should be it's taken as a compliment.
A
'Cause I was like,
compliment to who?
to the actress.
I don't know if she would do.
Oh no,
take it-
I didn't take his advice.
That's a
I
real
didn't
thing.
Thank you, C. Thomas Howell. I just remember going like, oh, I don't think so, dude. That seems like a little bit less than professional.
Isn't that
All right.
the guy from The Outsiders?
Yeah, Pony Boy.
Oh.
I think he was Pony Boy, or
He was Pony Boy. Yes, yes.
he was the other one.
I mean, that cast had Matt Dillon, Tom Cruise.
Steve CJ, MR Discord user Doc the Coconut Queen, brought up a good point of that companies pressuring employees to work last minute should be held liable for death and damages. Should be a good topic for the tort conference, right? That's a good point. I wish that I know that there's some labor lawyers around, but I have not been able to connect with them here. Help for Floridians. If you are evacuating from Florida, have nowhere to go, or can't afford a hotel, we have 40 acres in Picayune, Missouri. Mississippi, where you, your horses, farm animals, and pets can ride out the storm. We're about 9 hours from Tampa. It's at the Aaron Regan Animal Sanctuary.com. Go on to the Discord and post that. People can email there. I don't want to put out your email in this way, but people can check the Discord if they can. But look up the Aaron Regan Animal Sanctuary. And if you're, headed out, or people who are, or want to convince people to, there's an opportunity. That is incredibly generous of you.
Yeah.
FYI, and for what it's worth, here in South Central Wisconsin, every single ad interruption on my YouTube stream of the show is one trying to whip up trans panic, whether it's against Harris or Baldwin, wondering what others are seeing. There are,
It's constant.
they are deploying tens of millions of dollars in this way.
For anti-trans ads, which did not work out for them in 2022, by the way.
It did not work out for them in 2022. Who know? They're just trying to get every dollar they can. And, the difference in why it may not have the same impact as 2022 is that there's a lot more noise now. So and the Democrats don't seem to be sort of like highlighting this in the same way. We'll find out. But there's not necessarily the same sort of like backlash opportunity, although there might be. We'll see.
I don't know if there wasn't. Yeah, go on.
Sam, advantage blackjack player here. I'm begging you, never hit a hard 12 against the 16 and always hit a soft 12 versus a 16. Wait, what's a hard 12 versus a soft 12?
Maybe if you have an ace or if you don't.
Oh, yeah. You're right. Always hit a soft 12. But a soft.
Maybe.
But what's a soft 12?
I actually don't. I mean, I
Ace. Two eight. What's a soft 12?
A soft 12 would probably be if you have.
She was offered a tour,
Yeah.
sushi, and poker with the boys.
Wait, maybe that wouldn't be it. Because an ace and a. I don't know right now.
If you
Well, that's
wanna
what I'm
win in
saying.
Gambling, it's roulette. And put it on red.
Okay, I'm looking it up. Soft 12. All right. Now I really need to know now.
That sounds like somebody's playing with me.
Okay, a soft hand is when you have an ace. Yeah.
Yes, a soft. I know what a soft 9 is.
Right,
I
but
know
what
what
would
a
a soft
6
12
is.
be?
That's
Are they
two
messing?
aces.
No, they're messing with you. They're messing with you.
Of course they are.
Oh, okay. Damn it. All right, there we go.
You split 2 aces.
Yes.
A 6-5 ace. Oh, I see what they're saying. So as a 4th card, I would hit a 16.
They're trying to trick. It's a trick question because you can't.
Do not Google a soft 12 without a porn filter. Son of a.
Right, because the max
You
hand you
people
could get
are
with
horrible.
2 cards is
Yes,
11.
it's
Yes.
just somebody messing with me. All right, folks. Until tomorrow, Bradley, Matt, Emma, great job today. Folks, don't forget. Oh, we should just, you guys want to plug stuff? We didn't go to the fun efforts a little bit.
Well, I mean, check out ESPN. We'll be doing our pick show tomorrow, but specifically on Monday, Sam and I had that phenomenal interview with Ilan Pape, but we also on the show had a journalist from Gaza on. And I got a message this morning from the guy who connected the two of us, and basically the journalist Rakan Abed-el-Rahman. I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing it slightly, but he didn't want to plug this because he's I don't know. It's just he didn't plug this, but the guy who connected us did, and said that he has a GoFundMe to help him. As he mentioned in the interview, he has 4 small children. You can see Rakan is there on the left. That's the journalist that we were able to interview from Gaza on Monday. So if you have any spare change, or if you just feel like sharing this, this would be great to help out one of the journalists that's still alive who hasn't been targeted and killed by Israel within Gaza.
Yeah, journalist and father.
We'll put that link in the YouTube and podcast description, and let's just make sure to do that tomorrow during the commercial break too. We'll do it as well. Matt, Left Reckoning.
Oh yeah, Jose Luis and Kurt from the Soberania podcast covering Mexican politics, talking about Claudia Sheinbaum's coming into power, what the expectations are, what are the obstacles, and check that out, patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
All right, folks, and don't forget, as always, join the MajorityReport.com. You can support this show. We will be back live at noon tomorrow. Bradley, Matt, Emma, great job today, folks. We'll see you then.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the rope that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive.